What's Gull got? That's the question when we're talking about the case against Delphi murder suspect Richard Allen. The judge in the case, Judge Gull, this week entering an order correcting some of her previous mistakes or errors with regards to defense filings, but still, as of this moment, has not reinstated Richard Allen's attorneys. Here to discuss what these orders mean. Bob Motta, defense attorney, host of the podcast Defense Diaries. What's been the latest this week with Delphi and Judge Gull?
Oh, Tony, it's just the case that never sleeps, man. It's like
I
the
know.
case that never sleeps. Every time I try to do something else, like I'm doing this Avery deep dive.
Yeah.
Every time I think I'm out, they pull me back
They
in.
do.
Yeah, I mean, still, yeah, more action, like you said, kind of leading into this week. Gull ends up, as you aptly noted, she finally drafts an order, which essentially instructs the clerk to do everything that they were asking for in the writ
Hmm.
for the writ for mandamus. So you know that because there was two of those that were filed. We had the first writ that was basically saying, okay, your docket's all screwed up. There's tons of documents that you didn't put on there that should be put on there. There's documents that were on there that you took off, blah, blah, blah. So she then, knowing that she's got this due date of the 16th, which was yesterday, to get her written response on file on the 14th, she ends up filing that order, which effectively moots, and that's MOOT, not MUTE, moots out or kind of voids out or makes it irrelevant the writ for the mandamus, because she's essentially doing what they're asking the high court to make her to do. So at that point, there's one interesting thing in there in terms of that order. So she goes ahead and she orders that the 118 documents that they had created that weird website for, that was actually very difficult
Hmm.
to get into those documents. And as it was stated in the writ, none of them are in the petition. None of them were clearly marked what they were. So you have literally had to go through and like open everything individually. Didn't show you when things were filed, so there were a lot of problems with it. And frankly, it just wasn't easy to navigate.
Hmm.
If you're like an old man like me who's somewhat tech challenged, it was difficult, So basically she says, all right, like get those all on the CCS, which is the actual docketing system. And then as far as the two other things with this sheriff's, they were terming it an affidavit, but it's not really an affidavit. It's kind of like a report written by the sheriff in regards to this inmate that they were going to be transferring, who had been subpoenaed to come testify at that June hearing about getting Allen transferred out of Westville prison.
Hmm.
And essentially, this guy Baston had written this long letter saying, "Look, they've been torturing me." And I'm paraphrasing. Obviously, he goes
Yeah.
into great detail, but they've been torturing me here. Breaking his ankles, stabbing him with pens. Not treating him for the injuries. Soaking his mattress in urine. Like everything imaginable that you can imagine being done to you in a prison, they're doing to this guy. And but he also articulates that they're doing a lot of the same things, but physically and mentally torturing Richard Allen as well, which was the reason that they were going to try to bring him in to have him testify. And he's basically saying in this letter, look, I'm afraid to come testify because I feel if I do come testify, that what's going on now, which is already horrible, is going to get worse. So he's basically writing a letter to the judge saying, look, thanks, but no thanks. Like, I'm trying to stay alive here. And I feel like if I come testify, that may not be the case, so that's essentially going on. So she's now, what she had originally sealed those, which is interesting. I don't understand why she ever would have sealed that letter.
Hmm.
That letter should have been open and obvious for everybody to see. And you know that when that letter comes right around the time when this hearing's taking place, it makes it seem nefarious. Now, whether it was her intent for it to seem that way or not, but when the subject matter of that hearing is to get Richard Allen out of there for reasons that they're claiming are similar to what's going on with this guy, and then she decides, instead of allowing the defense to see it, which I don't know if they saw it or not, but the public certainly didn't see it, it just makes it seem shady.
Yeah.
Like, this guy's complaining of all the things that the defense is coming in here and complaining about with respect to Allen, and now she's like filing this thing under cover of darkness. It's like all these little things are the things that make you wonder what Gull is doing. Like, what is her motivation behind doing this stuff? Like, I don't think that Judge Gull is in cahoots with anybody to screw Richard Allen, at least objectively.
Mhm.
Do I think that she has zero regard for this guy's constitutional rights? Absolutely.
Yeah.
And what she's doing in terms of how she's handling this case is my proof of it.
Yeah.
I don't have to be a mind reader to see that she has very little regard for his constitutional rights. So ultimately, she files that order a couple days later. Yesterday, to me, a matter of fact, she drops her response. Response, frankly, is well written. It was defended properly. I think that they make strong arguments. I think that on the technical side of it, she's correct
Mhm.
in the sense that this should have been brought to the lower court prior to and had their motion denied by the lower court before they motioned it up to the high court.
Sure.
But when you read the original petition, they acknowledge that that is typically what's supposed to happen. So
Mhm.
they acknowledge that they skipped a step early on, like, and I'm talking about the relator, Richard Allen and his lawyers. They knew that they skipped that critical step
Yeah.
in terms of being able to go up to the high court, but then they tried to say, well, this is why we did it. There was extraordinary circumstances, and these are what they are, and this is why we had to skip that step. Whether or not the Supreme Court's going to find that to be uh, compelling enough for them to agree with Richard Allen and his attorney is yet to be seen. The bottom line is, however, that it's not going to matter because she cured like a vast majority of the issues.
Mhm.
Okay, so like all the docket stuff, she basically number one threw the clerk under the bus. So that she had a couple of moves. She had the move of, all right, they didn't follow the rules. So just without even getting into the merits of it, like the Supreme Court should just reject it because they didn't follow the rules. So just as a technical violation of the rules, they shouldn't even get to the merits of it. If you get to the merits of it, you can't blame me because the CCS is the clerk's responsibility alone. I have no responsibility over the docket. So that's her argument as to that. Like I reject that because when you look at these gaping holes, like I think she's right on the technical side of it. And if the court doesn't find that there was extraordinary circumstances or that, these are issues that could not be handled on appeal after conviction, like that this is the only way for them to get it done. If the court doesn't buy that, then it gets rejected on
Yeah.
those reasons. Never get to the merit stuff. But if they do get to the merit stuff, I think she makes a weak argument there. Like I just don't think like the clerk is not responsible for preparing court orders, meaning drafting it, making a ruling, and then signing it. That is
Sure.
the judge.
Mhm.
So when there's gaping holes in terms of court dates that have taken place and there's no order drafted, it's not the responsibility, or is it even in the purview? Like the clerk cannot write court orders and sign them. It's not their role.
Yeah.
That can only be done by the judge. So those gaping holes in the docket are going to fall at the feet of the judge ultimately. But like I said, I mean, the judge is smart enough to know like that this is how they were going to play it. They know that the much bigger fight is the upcoming petition, which is clearly a way more serious set of circumstances because it really involves the nuts and bolts of the case. They're trying
Mhm.
to get his attorneys reinstated. They're trying to get her pulled off the case, and they're obviously trying to stay or delay everything that's going on at the trial level. So that's where the real fight is. And I think that she realized, okay, look, I'm going to fix everything ahead of time. We'll still prepare the response for this first one. But, I don't want to go into the second one having lost the first one.
Sure.
So I think that she made the curative actions. I think she made the strong technical argument. I think she made the much weaker argument. And then the thing that stuck with me like the most in both her order, where she related back to the memo the controversial 136-page memo where she says, "Look, okay, like subsequent counsel, or I'm sorry, successor counsel has the ability to be able to adopt the memo and ask for the Franks hearing, which I will schedule. Or if they don't, then I won't, you
Hmm.
know." And she basically doesn't give but she also instructs new counsel that if they do adopt it, that they have to redact it. So I read that court order, I'm like, redact what? I'm like, the
That,
thing's
yeah,
out there. Like, it's like she's trying to act like the thing doesn't exist in the world and we haven't all seen it and that it's not out there. It's like what is the point of a redaction when the cat's already out of the bag? You
yeah.
know what I mean?
Uh,
So then when you kind of get to her response, she clarifies and she gets to the specifics. She's saying, I made these confidential because the defense filed this and had not redacted the victims' names.
okay,
Now, I've been searching in Indiana law. There are certainly circumstances, especially when you've got victims that are not deceased, but are still living, that are juvenile. They'll oftentimes just use their initials or will completely redact the names altogether in order to protect their identity because they're still alive and they
sure,
want to, but in a unfortunate situation where you've got victims that are deceased, you're not necessarily concerned about their privacy rights because they're not alive to have privacy rights. So that argument kind of falls on deaf ears. And I'm on top of that, I'm going back searching through the state's filings, and I see at least two filings where the state themselves had used both the girls' names, full names, and they weren't redacted, and she didn't make those confidential. So there's just like constant weird stuff going on with it.
yeah,
And, I just want this thing to get straightened out
yeah. I
so
mean, that's
so we can have a fair trial, man.
what. Let's talk about a point you made early on there: the accusations of misconduct in the prison on the part of the guards, the way that they're treating the inmates and such. Obviously, they're people in prison, but they have human rights. This sounds like it's utterly out of control. Can anything be done to go in there and investigate and look at this? I mean, take the whistleblower out of the equation. How does something like this fester and go on like that if, in fact, these accusations are true?
Man, I mean, it's like you can get like typically in a lot of states, they have somebody called like an ombudsman,
Hmm.
and that is, who you go to. And it's not an individual, it's a department, but you go to the ombudsman and you complain of conditions in prisons and jails, in terms of whether they're neglecting or mistreating or abusing, and then they go and conduct an investigation. Obviously, lawsuits can be filed, and lawsuits obviously will spark some type of investigation. The problem is with any kind of prisons and or jails, it's such a closed universe to the rest of the world.
Yeah,
It's like no one's doing surprise visits on them. You
sure.
know what I mean? Like they know where the cameras are. They know where there's the blank spots of the cameras or the blind spots where, if they're doing something on the down low, where those spots are. They're not going to make admissions to being abusive to people. So it's super challenging, and you've got this, the issue is that you've got convicted criminals in prison who they're just assuming, they being the prison and the prison staff and the warden, are assuming have zero credibility with the public because they're convicted felons.
Sure.
Well, are you going to believe the convicted felon or are you going to believe the warden of the prison? You
Yeah.
know what I mean? So it's like they rely on that, and it's tough to get these things fixed, man. I mean, like this isn't anything new.
So,
I've
I
been
mean,
practicing.
those of us who like don't are not super familiar with the inner workings of prisons, I think a lot of times we think of the violence and things of that nature from other inmates, not necessarily from the wardens or the ones that are there to facilitate the building and the operations of it. Do we what you said earlier and the claims in that were, I mean, they're shocking to me, but are they not that shocking to you? Are they not that shocking to a lot of people who are more familiar with this system? Are these common things that unfortunately go on behind the scenes that are easy to cover up and hide?
Yeah, absolutely they are. and that's not to say that there aren't prison guards who are wonderful people
Sure.
that treat people with, as human beings and respect the fact that they do have civil rights and human rights. I mean, but just like with any job, you're going to have awful people,
Mhm.
and again, you've got a situation where you have people that have, I guess you'd term it an exorbitant amount of power over inmates, so if an inmate's getting mouthy with you, you crack them. I mean, it's like there's just very little recourse in terms of the inmates. I mean, they can write like what they call a kite, like where they report things that happen. Whether or not that makes its way up the chain and actually anything happens from it is typically nothing happens with it. I mean, I know it from dealing with my clients in prisons,
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
tell me what's going on, and I believe them. They have no reason to be lying about things. I mean, like obviously Shawshank is a movie, but in terms of some of those guards, I think it's pretty accurate. When you look at the main dude who was just like the biggest a-hole you'll ever see.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like it happens, and I can tell you
Sure.
without question that, when you have a situation, especially when you're talking about like a Richard Allen situation where you've got a pretrial detainee, he hasn't even been convicted of anything,
Yeah.
zoomed innocent, he's in a prison with the worst of the worst who are all convicted, and and he's accused of being a child killer.
Sure.
Like anybody who befalls any kind of harm to a child, whether it's sexual abuse, whether it's goes as to the degree of murder,
Mhm.
they are despised not only by the inmates but by the guards, and they're tortured and they're mentally. They don't let them sleep. They just do all kinds of stuff to completely, have like just mental warfare with these guys and psychological warfare where they're just, getting them to the point where they're going to break, and a lot of times, like the whole thing with the confessions with Alan,
Mhm.
I just, whether it was because they're Odin guys or not, I have no idea. I mean, we know that they were Odin guys. Was it because they were trying to protect somebody, or is it because they're just trying to get this guy to fess it up?
Mhm.
Because they know that that's what they need to get this case closed because they don't have enough evidence. I mean, like to suggest that that's not a possibility is just incorrect and
Yeah.
it's naive because that kind of stuff just goes on in prisons all the time.
Sure.
And, so
The
yeah,
thing
I
is, he
mean,
shouldn't even be there to
it's
begin with. He should be in a jail. He should not be in a prison system like this.
exactly.
That's it. It's just it's so whack. I mean, at the end of the day, uh, let's say he's found innocent. If this eventually does make it to trial and they find him innocent, does he have a massive lawsuit against the state, against these prison systems, against all that? If,
100.
yeah.
Yeah, that no question.
Wow.
Like, and I'm sure it'll be filed,
Yeah.
and there'll be a lot of defendants. It'll go as high up. I mean, if it turns out that in fact Tony Liggett lied to get the search warrant to search his house, and which was really the impetus to the arrest,
Hmm.
because they always had him volunteering the fact that he was at the bridge.
Yeah.
And like people keep like saying he admitted it. Well, like he didn't admit anything. This wasn't an in custody interrogation where they got him to cave. This is a guy that lived in a community that worked at a CVS in a town of 1,200 people who probably a majority of people either knew or had seen on multiple occasions
Yeah.
in all the years he's lived there. It's not like he's a stranger, and the guy goes when the law enforcement asks for, the community to come out and let them know, or
Hmm.
call into the tip line, let them know if they were out at the bridge that day so they could find out what they saw, who they saw, anything helpful that they may know, and they ask them to come and volunteer that information, which Alan does.
Yeah.
And it's like the people that like to think that he's guilty, they use the rationale, oh well, he was trying to get ahead of it, like he had no idea. Like, you have to presume that he's guilty and that he was aware that he is Bridge Guy and that he saw Libby with her phone.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to like jump to the conclusion that for some reason, even though he sees her with her phone recording Abby, like that's when she catches Bridge Guy.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, she's taking this recording of her friend, so her phone's going to be stuck out recording. So the theory would be that whoever Bridge Guy is, for some reason, decides to leave her with the phone
Yeah.
instead of grabbing the phone. You know, and it's like, and if it's Richard Allen, you have to assume that he's that person so that he knows that she was taking photographs, yet still comes and volunteers that he was on the bridge, knowing that there's video out there. So that's their argument. Well, he knows that there's video. So instead of just taking the phone and destroying it or tossing it somewhere and getting rid of it, you know, he decides, he comes up with this master plan in like on the day of or the next day where he's going to front it. He's going to go to law enforcement or this resource officer and say, hey, yeah, I was out there, you know, just so it doesn't appear that he's lying, even though we know for a fact that there's no way they're going to be able to figure out who he is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we went 5 years with the Bridge Guy picture out there.
Yeah.
And we went 5 years with Dan Doolin, the guy he made the statement to,
Mm-hmm.
actually at the press conference where they're, you know, releasing the photo of Bridge Guy to the public.
Sure.
And this guy doesn't put 2 and 2 together 2 days after Allen's like, hey, yeah, I was out at the bridge and I was wearing this, this, and this, all of which people are now saying matches Bridge Guy. But this guy doesn't put it together. And then we go 5 years with nobody putting it together. Nobody saying, oh, yeah, that looks like Richard Allen. Again, in a town of 1,200 people where he works at a very public job, where people are in and out of that CVS all the time. I've been to Delphi on many, many occasions. There's not many places to go in terms of like pharmacies. Like CVS is kind of it, you know? So, I mean, I'm sure it's heavily frequented.
Yeah.
You know, he was the guy that was working, you know, the photo section. So when people are getting pictures printed out, they're dealing with Richard Allen.
Yeah.
So I don't know, man. You know, I mean, you kind of know where I'm at with it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I lean heavily that I don't think that he's the guy. I think that this was an arrest that I buy the defense's theory that, you know, there's an election cycle coming up and Liggett's trying to get reelected. And, you know, that's why this thing happens, you know, that this arrest happens right before the election in October. You know, we're first week in November.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's when the elections are. And, you know, this huge arrest happens. It's a good way to get yourself elected.
Yeah,
You know,
without a doubt.
it's like it's not a crazy concept when you're looking at it, you know, just objectively. You know, could it turn out that they have all kinds of evidence against Richard Allen? Well, then I'm completely changing my mind.
Sure.
If they have the evidence to prove that he's guilty, then I'm thrilled that they got the right guy and they're going to be punishing the right person for the crimes.
Yeah.
But where I'm sitting right now with what we know, it's not even close to being anything even remotely like in the neighborhood of beyond a reasonable doubt that he's the killer. So, and that's where I'm at with it. And no one's convincing me otherwise.
Hey, it's Tony Brueski. If you want more of our interview with our guests, be sure to check out our podcast, Hidden Killers with Tony Brueski. Just search that wherever you download podcasts and press subscribe. Also, you can check out our YouTube channel for the full video version of the interviews as well, under the same name, Hidden Killers with Tony Brueski. Check it out, subscribe, binge, and enjoy. Thanks for watching.